I'll never forget this because it was just one of the funniest happy accidents of the whole career, but it set me up for good. I wound up walking into a studio in Northeast Calgary in 1997, and he said, "Oh man, your timing's great." He said, "We're doing this project. We hired an actor to do the narration, but they're seriously doubting the casting choice." And I was like, "Well, do you want me to read a piece of it?" He said, "Would you?" So I go in and I rattle off a whole page without making a mistake. And it turns out it was the tutorial programs for Office 97 for Microsoft. And I just thought, oh, come on.
Before we get into this week's episode, I'd like to quickly talk about the new studio that we're filming in. It's called Offset Studios. Myself and business partner Chris opened this up. It's a 3,000 square foot, 4-set building. Each set has a different vibe to it. Our goal was to create a space for individuals and businesses to tell their stories through the lens of a camera. Each set has a different vibe. We have a 70s set, a speakeasy, a very bright white room, and a kind of old school hair and makeup. Our idea is to kind of fill this with creative individuals that are looking to share their story online. I think that's enough blabbing. Let's get into the show. Welcome to the Calgary Sessions. This is episode number 202. I'm your host, Jeff Humphreys. Before I get into it today, if you're digging the show, just in general, this episode, share it, subscribe to it, send me a DM, just like interact with the show. I'd appreciate it. So today's guest, bit of a long, winding way how he got here. Our good mutual friend, Mr. Dowie Wood, did this intro via email because you had an idea and you were trying to figure it out. And obviously you're friends with Dowie. Dowie's like, you got to talk to Jeff. So we started talking, but you were quick to nominate one of your friends, Jane, to come on the show. You're like, "Oh, by the way, do you know this person?" And she'd be awesome. And so I do my research. We find Jane. She agrees to come on the show, which is cool. And then you have your other idea of, you want to spin up a show with your buddy. And so you come into the studio and we sit and bullshit for, I don't know how long, an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Yeah. Thank you. You were super generous that day.
It was a good chat. And then as you're leaving, I'm like, "You want to come on the show?" And so here we are. So
what?
Name and who you are.
My name is Paul Boucher, and I'm a voice actor. I'm bilingual and landed in Calgary after a pretty typical radio odyssey. Lots of different markets across the country. Born in Northern Ontario, Kapuskasing, Milltown, off to Yellowknife, Grand Prairie, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Saskatoon, here, Montreal, and then back here because it was a better place to live. Mm-hmm. Montreal's a great place to visit. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, that's good.
Even as a French kid,
yeah,
right? Because I grew up in French, and I thought, I'm going to Mecca. I'm going to go see where the Canadiens play. But you can't be a proud Canadian in Montreal, and I was a Canadian. Even as a French kid. So it was like, no, I'm going to go back to Calgary.
Your voiceover career is, I find it very interesting. I have a good friend in Vancouver. His name's Ryan Cowie.
Okay.
Been an actor out there for a long time. Started doing voice stuff. Yeah. Him and I talk often enough that he's always talking about his auditions.
Yes.
He's got he's building the booth in his basement and doing the voiceovers. And it took him years to get a couple of gigs. So the craft that you're in is very interesting to me because it's a hard one.
It is and it isn't.
You've been doing it for so long, so it's like...
I have, but I do remember getting started because it was in Calgary, really. I did my first commercial outside of a radio station in Lethbridge for $25 for a TV station. And I remember thinking, well, this is awesome because I was making $1,000 a month in radio. But I got to Calgary, and being bilingual and Calgary being a bigger city, our radio producer, who was really well connected, his name was Amin Batia. Amin is like an award-winning composer, scorer of film, TV. All these Calgarians have gone on to these amazing careers, right? Mm-hmm. But Amin he directed me for the first time in a booth like a musician. It was really interesting to be directed that way. And he said, "Hey, I've got a guy who needs a voiceover in French for the Canada Revenue Agency at the time." And so I thought, yeah, okay, whatever. So I go, and his name is Peter Temple. He ran a company called Media One for years and years and years. And that was my first freelance gig in Calgary. And I remember thinking, $300 per language. Okay.
Got something.
And what was interesting was, unlike Ryan, in Calgary, I auditioned, but because I was on air at a radio station, a lot of people didn't want to use me in their commercials because I was ever present almost everywhere. And so I wound up walking into a studio in Northeast Calgary in 1997 and with a demo. and Terry Johnsgaard was the guy's name. And I'll never forget this because it was just one of the funniest happy accidents of the whole career, but it set me up for good. I was good at narration. I like sight reading, and I'm good at lifting stuff off the page quickly. And that's a gift I attribute to my mom, town librarian, taught me how to read English. And so I work harder to get the words right in English, I think. Anyway, I walked in and he said, "Oh man, your timing's great." He said, "We're doing this project and we hired an actor to do the narration, but he's just having real trouble sight reading and we need to get this done quickly." And I was like, "Well, do you want me to read a piece of it?" He said, "Would you?" He said, "Yeah, because they're seriously doubting the casting choice." I was like, "Okay." So I go in and I rattle off a whole page without making a mistake. And it turns out it was the tutorial programs for Office 97 for Microsoft. And it was being done by a local multimedia company here called Discoverware. They were a thing, and I just thought, oh, come on. So sure enough, the lady who was doing the casting has a brother in broadcasting. And she said, "I didn't want to hire a broadcaster. You people all sound the same." I was like, kind of. She said, "But you sound a little different on this." And I said, "Yeah, okay." So I started working for Discoverware and doing that kind of narration. And then just as we were getting out of 56K baud modems back in the late 90s, right, where we were just all of a sudden getting broadband, another big multimedia company here, ICOM, was producing content for the oil and gas companies. So that's the happy accident of being in Calgary as a freelance voice guy who happens to be bilingual and who can sight read 40 pages in record time, because I just was getting all this work without having to audition, and it was repeat work. I probably, on average, would do between 40 and 80 projects a year for those guys, and they were one client. And then there were other clients who had the same kind of need, and they were all oil and gas clients. People outside Calgary, and even me at the beginning of it, had no idea of the scope and scale of oil and gas and how global an industry it is. Like, I remember doing a narration for, I forget which of the oil and gas companies. They had a place in Brazil. And the whole thing was about, okay, so we're going to send you to Brazil, but we're going to sew a pocket inside your shirt for your phone and your wallet. When you get to the airport, you will not actually go with anybody except for the number that's pre-programmed into this burner phone that we've set up for you.
Crazy.
And they would have people try to lure them away. And then that would be the end of where that person was. They literally got kidnapped and held for ransom and that whole thing. So yeah, it was crazy. And so it was kind of like, do not go to the favelas, stick to the downtowns, all this stuff. And it was really interesting for me to see, here's this company in Calgary having to educate their workers who are going to Brazil. But then the same thing would happen about Dubai, Nigeria, all of these places, North Sea. When I got back from vacation, I still work for a company that does work with the North Sea stuff. And it was all safety stuff. Company from Texas doing work in the North Sea, because the British aren't doing any more work in the North Sea, but through an Irish production company. And here I am in my garage in my backyard studio in Calgary doing all this narration.
It's so cool.
It's bizarre.
It's so random.
Ryan would envy the fact that I had all this regular work.
For years.
But now I'm more like Ryan in that the industry's changed and there's so much more AI involved, right? So a lot of corporate and e-learning stuff has gone to AI. I've got kind of a solution in the works for that. But yeah, so I'm auditioning. And Ryan will tell you, it's like, you're doing 100 auditions, no feedback. Voice gone into the ether, And then you get 5 bookings. And then you have an agent tell you, "Oh, that's a great booking ratio." And I'm like, 5 for 100 with no feedback. It's tough to persevere through.
For sure.
So I admire Ryan and people like him who had to do nothing but that. I've been really, really fortunate up until now. So the question I have now is, do I have the energy to stay in this business?
Yeah.
And am I resilient enough to kind of withstand that 100 with no feedback, 5 booking thing? The bookings are better though. Like an e-learning program, to give you an idea, like a typical 30-minute e-learning program takes a few hours to record and edit. Probably at the end of the day, maybe $1,000, $1,200. You do a 10-minute trailer for Netflix 10-second trailer for Netflix, and it takes you maybe 15 minutes to give them multiple takes because you feel guilty about just giving them one. and it's $2,500 US. And you just think, okay, all right, I know where I'm going to focus my energy.
For sure.
Yeah.
That'd be cool because I think to hear that version of the story of how you kind of got into it is interesting, right? Because everyone's path is so different. There's no like thing, and you and I are also connected through SAIT, through Laura.
Yeah.
You spoke at her podcast class. I went in and spoke like 2 weeks after.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So anyway, so it's like it's such an interesting because this next generation is looking. They're looking at a dude like you that's been around, a lot of experience.
Did you tell them the same thing I did?
Which would you tell them?
Nobody cares what you have to say.
I was on them about like, all students, and when I say all students might be a slight exaggeration, they all want a job. What am I going to do after this thing?
Right.
So that's what I kind of hammered on them was like, start building a community. Start like getting online and meeting people. Like, when a dude like you walks into the room, you should probably invest some time, build some sort of relationship. Yeah. Don't ask for something out of the gate, but like build something. So
I've had 2 of those students, by the way, connect with me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, me too. I had
2.
And I got 2 showing up next week for a tour of this place.
Good.
But isn't that interesting, right? There's a group, but there's always like different tiers of what people can do with these opportunities.
Well, see, and you've done a lot of different things too. I remember hearing years ago, the ratio in any business is the 5% of the people in that particular industry make like 90% of the money. Yeah. And it's really true. And it's not hard to see why when you, like I've taught classes, I've, gone and spoken at classes, and that is like, how many kids were in that class or students? Maybe 30?
Yep.
So 2 out of 30, right? And part of it is, it's funny because being digitally native hasn't helped them understand the amplification, the exponential amplification of a network. Yeah. They just don't get it. I have a daughter who's about to become a lawyer. Her mom, my wife Heather, runs the Alberta Association of Corporate Counsel. So she herds lawyers into events, right? All these in-house counsel. Unbelievable connections for my daughter, but she's like, I don't know if I'm going to take advantage of it. I'm like, what are you thinking? It's like, your parents are part of your first network. Yeah. You can leave them behind eventually, but not when they're like that.
Exactly. That's all you have to say.
It's like you're coming out of, like she kind of funded her grad degree, but her undergrad was all student loans. I'm like, you need all the connections you can get to get out of this, right? Yeah. So, it is funny.
So let's take this thing back. I'd love to hear about where you grew up. Obviously you touched on it, but like where, how, parents, siblings, school, work, all the random experiences in between, and then that'll kind of like leave us where you are today.
I was thinking about this last night because I was listening to another one of your guests, Michelle Morgan, who had this fabulous, history, and Vince Fowler, who you've had on as a guest and who I'm amazed has survived to adulthood with his history. But he's just a remarkable guy. And I thought, what's in my history? So I was a skinny, active kid, Kapuskasing, and like lots of places to play outside. And like quite a few of your guests, and you too, it's kind of like we were free range kids. Like, okay, you know what? Come in when it's like sunset kind of thing. We used to play kick the can. Awesome. Right? Yeah. And so we'd have the can and, you'd have parents yelling for their kids as soon as the sun started to go down. Yeah. So that was kind of growing up, but I was not really good at anything, except not even really at school. But I remember some of the really important experiences. Like when I learned how to speak English when I was about 10. Okay. And my mom had become, by that point, the assistant to the town librarian. She eventually became the town librarian. My dad was a machinist at the paper mill, but the paper mill was going to kill him. He only worked there for about a year. And the English-French divide was a big factor in Kapuskasing. So my dad was welcomed into the machine shop with, you're the first frog we've ever had in the machine shop. So don't fuck it up. It's like, okay. This is like 1965-ish, maybe. Because he was 21 when they had me. And it's so funny. I remember doing the math years later. Say, so Mom, you guys got married in May and I'm born in November. She said, yeah, my dad wasn't happy. It was like, oh, okay.
Quick math.
Quick math. But it was really interesting growing up in that environment because my dad was getting paid really well as a machinist at the mill. But when he left the mill, he became a teacher at the high school, a machine shop teacher. Huge drop in salary.
Yeah.
So we moved. We moved from where I'd had, friends, and I was only, I think, 5 or 6, and we moved to this neighborhood in Kapuskasing called Val-Albert. And it was different. There was a class difference in the neighborhood, and it was all Francophone. It was really strange. So that was my first real awareness. It's like, oh, French people are poor. I thought, okay. And they don't talk the same. And I'm French. I'd grown up in a different neighborhood.
Yeah.
Like our milkman lived across the street from us. He used to kind of walk across from his house to drop off the milk on our doorstep. 12,000 people in that town. And it wasn't until we moved to the North Field, which is where we stayed after that. I was the only French kid in that neighborhood on that side of what was essentially a horseshoe. And I was the only Canadiens fan, I can tell you that. I was the only one who had that jersey. Everybody else was Detroit. And I hated the Flyers, hated the Philadelphia Flyers. They were such scum. They'd taken the cup away from my Canadiens, along with the Islanders. But they were all English hockey teams, especially the Leafs. And we could start laughing at the Leafs in the early 70s. We did. But I was never really welcome in the neighborhood. And so for me, I think that was the beginning of me feeling like an outsider, like I didn't fit in somewhere. So I said to my mom, I said, I've got to learn how to speak English. And she said, yeah, you do. So there's the Americana encyclopedia. Start with the A's. When you run into tough words, let me know. Okay. And so, phonics and whatever else, however we learned languages. And so my dad and I are still the only two in the family who speak without an accent.
No way.
Yeah. Everybody else sounds like Jean Chrétien. We speak French and we speak English sometimes. But it's just that accent has stayed a character in my repertoire forever because it's come in handy a couple of times. But let me see. From there, I was the only one of my family who was allowed to go to English high school. So my dad was taught at the English high school, but they eventually built a French high school. And my dad went to be the tech director at that high school. He said, you can pick which school you want to go to. I said, well, I'm going to the English high school. It's not that I don't want, to be taught by you or anything. I just have wanted to go to the English high school since I was a kid.
Just because?
Yeah, because again, and it's not fair, but it was my feeling. I just thought English were better.
Yeah.
And it's funny when you try to explain the English-French divide to people who haven't lived through it, even in Quebec, and it was pronounced in Kapuskasing too, the English had all of the levers of commerce and power, really. And it wasn't until the 60s where a lot of Francophones were actually allowed to get an education. So in Quebec, it took the form of the Quiet Revolution. So the first educated generation in Quebec, René Lévesque, Pierre Trudeau, and all of the women who changed the landscape in Quebec. They actually were the ones who enacted laws that saying, this is my maiden name and I'm freaking keeping it. You can stuff your married name wherever you like. And so in Quebec, you're not allowed to take another name. Your ID, your driver's license is your maiden name. But that was all part of that. We're getting rid of the Catholic Church and making Quebec a much more secular kind of society. And that happened with that generation. It was that recent. And the same sort of thing was happening in Kapuskasing. Like my mom and dad they were both educated. My dad had gone to school, obviously, in trade school. And my mom had gone to be a nurse before she came back to marry my dad. So for them, education was really important. And so learning a second language was like, yeah, okay, of course. And my English teacher in grade 7, there were two of them, Mr. Mangan, Madame Bezel. And Madame Bezel used to have these competitions. And she'd make us stand up in class and, okay, you can read out loud until you make a mistake. I'm like, I win this battle. I thought, okay, I'm going to go. So I would read and I would go entire classes without making a mistake. So 40 minutes of reading. But the other woman who could do that is a woman named Louise Beausoleil. She was my rival, but she always spoke with a French accent. I was like, how are you getting through these words with the accent? But that was how it was like it became a bit of a competition. And so for me, grade 7 and 8 coincided with me finally developing an athletic ability. My grandfather had a cabin at the lake, which was 13 miles away, 26 kilometers away. And my mom carried me out from the dock to a point in the middle of the bay. And I should have thought this through. She's 5'1.5", but she's carrying me. And then she drops me in the water. And I flail like a kite in the worst windstorm you can imagine. It was awful. And she said, "Oh, for God's sake, just stand up." She said, "No kid of mine is not going to know how to swim." And she put me in swimming lessons. And that was the first thing I did well athletically. And so I entered swim lessons. I was in the diving club and the swim club. Once I was in the swim club, I don't think I lost a race for almost 4 years.
No way.
It was awesome, right? But there's a problem that happens with a kid who needs attention and who can't get it any other way because he hasn't formed bonds or friendships with people because he doesn't feel like he belongs. And it led directly to the radio career. I was fired as a junior lifeguard because I was impertinent. Big shock. I was the rock star. Come on, who are you telling me what to do? And so I go into the radio station and I could basically walk and talk at the same time, which is the reason I got the job. But radio stations in 1977 were, try to imagine Berber carpet lined walls.
Amazing.
Able to smoke in the rooms.
Awesome.
I never smoked, but these guys all did, like mounds
Classic.
of ashes, right? Yeah. And so it stunk in there. Like you would have to shower when you got home from work. But that was my first experience. And that combination of wanting attention, suddenly being good at something, and then being good at a second thing, because I could talk. I was a terrible broadcaster for a long, long time. But I could talk and read. And in particular, I could sight read. So if you can imagine, there'd be a beast behind me, the teletype, going all the time. We would rip and read. This indexed fingernail is still tougher than any other nail in my hands because we used to rip and read the news. So we'd go and we'd rip the news 2 minutes before we had to read it. And then you'd have to go through a 2 to 5 minute newscast. And I was like, so all of these things led to me being able to do that piece of it. And then in 1980, I had a fight with my dad. And my dad, at this point, he'd always drank a bit, but it had become a bit of an issue. And so he would do dumb things like throw my records out in the street. So I don't know what record it was. Seems to me that I had graduated from the Osmonds to Black Sabbath by this point, but whatever it was, he frisbeed it out into the street. And I was like, I can't believe you did that. So I wanted to get by him. He was blocking the front door for me to go get the record. Anyway, he pushed me, like I'm 18 and I'm strong. I've been swimming. So I just pushed him back and pushed him out of my way and went and got my record. Next day, my mom says, you cracked a rib over your dad's heart. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. And she said, I can't have two people this big in this house fighting, and your dad's not going to be the one to leave. I'm like, oh. So already I'm thinking post-secondary at this point, and I think I'd applied at Fanshawe College in London, but it wasn't until the fall. And I had expected my parents to be able to help me with the tuition because I was an entitled little brat. And I went and sat in my old elementary school playground treehouse, felt sorry for myself for an hour. And I don't know what I thought. I just thought, I don't want to live in Kapuskasing in an apartment, like all the apartments I'd seen in Kapuskasing were. And I don't want to work at the mill, which was where almost everybody went if they didn't go to post-secondary. And post-secondary is not till the fall. So the next day, I had sent demo tapes out from the radio station. The way that you did it was you took a compilation of your air shift and you edited it all together, and they called it air checks, and you sent them off, hoped to get hired. And so I got a call the next day after my pity party on the treehouse. And it was Charles Dent from a radio station in Yellowknife. They had just started this radio station a year before. And he said, hey, listen, Manpower can pay your move up here if you can get up here. And I'm like, I'm in. I didn't even think. I didn't check with my mom. I didn't check with anybody. I said, yeah, I'm good. Because I thought, well, she was obviously serious. She never would have said anything like that. And I was gone in less than a week.
Crazy.
Yeah. So bus from Kapuskasing to Thunder Bay to Winnipeg, and then plane from Winnipeg to Yellowknife. And that was Canada Day 1980 was when I went on the air in Yellowknife.
Crazy.
And like no sunset, right? And I'm like, what is going on? We were playing golf at 3 a.m.
Crazy.
Yeah, it was really strange because my siblings, so my sister Sue, still around, my sister Denise, also suffered from drinking issues, and she passed away during COVID. My brother is still in Kapuskasing as well, and my mom's still there. And, you know, she's 86. Wow. She asked me for hiking poles for Christmas a couple of Christmases ago. Cool. It was a great place to grow up when it was a profitable place. I think the population's about half now. And still okay. Like the town is still doing okay because it's on the Trans-Canada Northern Route, along with places that are also equally well known, like Hearst and Fauquier and Moonbeam, a town called Moonbeam, where my brother gets his beef. So, yeah, it was a great place to be from. And there's no shortage. I have a guy named Frank Gregovich to thank for hiring me at the radio station in Kapuskasing. And I have a guy named Steve Boyton to thank for my love of music, which is the reason I stayed in the business as long as I did. Because we were playing terrible music. Like, I can't even describe it. It was half instrumental, easy listening, James Last Orchestra. Oh, it was awful. And he wouldn't allow us to play Gordon Lightfoot or the Beatles because they couldn't sing, the general manager. But Frank Gregovich was like, no. But Steve Boyton arrived, and the station format changed because that general manager moved on. And so all of a sudden, we're playing current music. But think back to 1977 and what current music means. There's a lot of disco. It was just when all of these bands were coming out with their disco songs, right? So Stones came out with Some Girls, which had Miss You on it. Kiss came out with I Was Made for Loving You. And then there was all the disco, Donna Summers, Bee Gees. Oh my God, the Bee Gees. Kill me now if I ever have to hear Tragedy again. But Steve Boyton said, oh, there's a new Springsteen album coming out. And I said to him, who's Springsteen? He says, oh, that's it. So he hauled me in on a Saturday. He had a milk carton full of records, which is how we moved them all from city to city. And he took me through every artist in the Asylum label record. So there was Joni Mitchell, Jackson Browne, the Eagles. And he just gave me this musical education. Springsteen, so many others, Bob Seger. Like, I just didn't know who these people were because we weren't playing them. And then he said, and here's the Encyclopedia of Rock and Roll. He said, so next week there's a quiz. And essentially what he said was, I want you to be able to read liner notes and be able to tell me who else those people have played with. And so I developed a love of that kind of stuff.
Wild.
And you run into people like that who are so passionate, who just kind of communicate that little spark to you, and you benefit and you go. And then Yellowknife.
Before Yellowknife, when you're getting into the radio scene, you know, like this whole experience from records in the milk.
I was 15.
At the radio station?
At the radio station.
It doesn't happen, right? It doesn't happen anymore.
No.
And even then, still, to be educated in that way around music, you know, you got your MBA at a very young age around music.
Yeah.
And what's also interesting is that you've said twice now is this like ability to line read.
Yeah.
You learn in encyclopedias, you learn in this music thing.
Yeah.
Before you start telling those stories, you're saying how you could rip through what you do today too. You can just like rip through things. Yeah. It's so interesting how there's like these weird experiences. Fast forward X amount of years and you're like, this is what I do.
I know. And you and I have touched on this, but I remember going home to Kapuskasing and a neighbor across the street, younger guy than me. So I am 64 as we record this. John, I think I was 62 when I went home. He was 59. And he was already on permanent disability after working at the mill. And I know so many people like that, you know, who had quote unquote real jobs. Yeah. And here I've been talking for a living and I feel almost guilty about being able to kind of like, I'm going to go on the Camino with my son. You know, I'm like, okay. So yeah, there's a little, it's almost like survivor guilt. You know, you just think, man, I dodged a bullet by not working at the mill.
When your mom says you're out of the house, you were 18-ish? 18?
Yeah, 18.
Which is the thing, obviously. At the time, it was, you know, you had a pity party for a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Without that phone call, what was running through your head? If you knew you were going to have to like come up to pay for school, like did you have a plan before that phone call?
The plan was Fanshawe in London, Ontario, and to continue
do what?
working in radio. To continue working in radio.
There's like a radio program there or something?
There was.
Okay.
And I was lucky to get in because I remember my dad drove me down for the interview and they said, yeah, we normally don't take kids from out of the area, but you've got radio experience. You've been working for 2.5 years. So yeah, we'll take you into the program. And then I wound up not ever going because I got to Yellowknife and we have a roommate who shall remain nameless. He was honestly, he makes Donald Trump look like a pretty good human being. Anyway, he would do awful things, but he stole my supercycle, my Canadian. There was the only transportation I had. He stole my bike and left us after doing all kinds of horrible things. But he also stiffed us for a phone bill. Back in 1980, long distance was expensive. It was a $900 phone bill, and my salary was $860. Oh, and we had $40 of non-taxable Northern Living allowance over top of that. But that meant roommates. And the roommate and I, Bill, were stuck with this phone bill. Man, Northwestel chased me.
No way.
Oh, they collected eventually because I felt guilty. I felt terrible. I hadn't paid my phone bill. It wasn't my phone bill. They were all the other guy's calls. And he's one of the few people that I've met. I think I know I hope he rots in hell, but really slowly, really, really slowly. Like first circle, then second circle, then third circle of hell, and then back to the first. I'd be perfectly happy with that for him. Yeah.
When you get there, you're young. Obviously, it's the middle. You went from
Kapuskasing,
it's a giant move.
Yeah.
Were you confident enough to like trust it? Were you okay with it when you got there? Like, when the wheels land, are you like, oh, this is going to be awesome? Or are you like, oh, fuck, I've done something?
Yeah, more that.
Yeah.
And, one of the running currents through my entire life to this day, honestly, is, I sometimes characterize it lightly as one accident after another because there was never any plan after that. There was I got there and I learned very quickly that my parents didn't have the money to send me to Fanshawe. And I couldn't get back because we were stuck with this phone bill. So I had to keep working. The other complication in me having to keep working was that the Charles Dent, who'd hired me, wanted to fire me because I was terrible.
On air?
Yeah.
No way.
I was just like cock of the walk terrible. You believe you're good, but you're not good. And so it was his wife, Irene, and Charles went on to become, I think, the premier of the Northwest Territories.
Oh, no way.
Many years later. But Irene kept me employed. She said, Charles, you can't just move this kid across the country and then just turf him out on his ass. I thought, thank God. I only found that out later. But she kept me there. And I eventually did get better. It took a long time. It wasn't there. But we had some interesting people cycle through there. And Yellowknife was an awesome experience. And you wind up with all these crazy stories because Yellowknife is a very transient place for people like radio. There's a great book written about the CBC up there. I think it was Late Nights on Air is what it was called. And it was about that same era where the CBC was competing with this private radio station and they were allowed suddenly to run ads. And the private station was like, listen, we're just making a go of it here, barely. Now these guys? So that was my first intimation of that kind of a battle, which has been kind of a recurring thing, for private radio stations ever since. But I learned so much in Yellowknife. My roommate was a guy named Bill Pruden, and I was kind of tossed into his lap, and he was just like, oh, great.
So baby heater.
His speaker stands were cases of, it was Lethbridge Pilsner. And he had, I think, 12 or 16 of them with the little Radio Shack black speakers. Those were his speakers, but he loved jazz. Another complete education for me. He'd be playing Ella Fitzgerald when I get home after playing whatever was out at the time. I mean, what was out at the time? Oh, Prism. Yeah. Spaceship Superstar. Tom Cochrane, Lunatic Fringe. Kind of. But, we were playing a lot. That was that time. And I would get home and there's Ella Fitzgerald playing. And he also loved comedy albums. So I would come back and Fred Sanford. And I'm like, what's the title of this album? Oh, You Got to Wash Your Ass. I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Okay, all right. So I learned a lot. And Bill kind of just kind of pried open my horizons in a good way, because he was a decent guy. And Charles had chose wisely to have like the kid who knew nothing to land in a place where at least he could teach me how to buy groceries. Like
nothing.
So no, I had no knowledge, and I landed, and I remember going into work, and I thought, well, I can go home now. I've done a couple of shifts.
We're off air.
Couldn't go home.
Right.
And so, yeah, I had to keep working. And there's a funny story on my first Christmas there. There's one of the things that happens with radio announcers, and I mean, they spoofed this well in WKRP and a bunch of other radio kind of shows where people call in and they're groupies in one way or another. And so this girl called in, and I was just starting my shift on Christmas Day at noon. And because you couldn't just tape the way they can now, and we had to be live. Anyway, she calls me at noon. I talked to her till 6, and I was going out with the only other couple that was staying from the radio station staff, because everybody else had gone home. They'd gone to their respective cities, but Matt and Sandy were staying in town, and we were all going for dinner. So I invited this girl for dinner, and everybody gets drunk because we're 19. I just turned 19 at this point. And this girl comes home, and I realize very quickly, no, this is a mistake. It's like I'm babysitting. I'm house sitting a trailer, because Yellowknife had a lot of mobile home parks because you couldn't build houses. It was permafrost. Anyway, I'm house sitting this trailer that's got, I think, an ounce of pot and more hash in the fridge. He said, help yourself to the stash. I'm like, okay. So he'll remain nameless because he was the rec director at the time for the city of Yellowknife. But he also did an evening shift on Sunday nights at the radio station because he always wanted to do that. Anyway, so I take care of their place. I've kicked her out. So at least I had the decency to get her a cab. It was minus 50. Get her a cab. She goes home. 2 weeks later, our rec director is missing in action, and I have to fill in for his Sunday shift. And I'm like, oh, what's the matter? Oh, he got gonorrhea from some girl who called him, and he then passed it on to his live-in.
Jesus.
Yeah, same girl. So, yeah. So you kind of go, okay, again, somebody's looking out for me.
Totally.
Right? Anyway, so Yellowknife was a great experience. I learned a lot from the different people that came through. There were some really... Trudy Bilo was a lady who she did part-time reception, but was really responsible for traffic. And she was just super kind and super supportive to all of us. It's funny, she wasn't much older than us, but she was like a den mother for us. She just kind of made sure that we were okay. But the cool thing about these two first jobs is when we got commercial copy, and this leads into what I do now, we were given the copy, and sometimes we were given some music.
Yeah.
And we were told to go produce the commercial. So after our shifts, we would go into the production studio and we would produce the commercial. So we learned how to do all kinds of things that we never would have learned otherwise. We changed copy when the copy was badly written. And the clients were like, yeah, whatever. We picked music. So we were producing in the literal sense. Yeah. So when I got to Grand Prairie after Yellowknife, so a year and 3 months in Yellowknife, 2 months in Yellowknife, off to Grand Prairie I go, country station.
Poached, or do you find an opportunity? How'd you get there?
I actually sent an air check off to both stations. There was a CFGP, which was the contemporary station, and I thought, I may as well send one to the country station too. Sure enough, that's who hires me. And thank God, Chuck Ingram, who was the program director at the time, it was a brand new station, and there's so much oil and gas money in Grand Prairie. It was brand new. It was the nicest, I think, until I had a renovated studio in Calgary, it was the nicest studio I worked in.
Cool.
It was all brand new. And it was the first time I worked with a producer. So after my shift, they said, oh, you got to do commercials with Norm. I'm like, who's Norm? Oh, he's the producer. I'm like, oh, okay. So Norm Zanoli, Calgarian, in Grand Prairie. I go into the booth, and he says, okay, let's just have a take. So I do a take, and I literally took the headphones off my head. He said, hey, where are you going? I said, well, we're done. He said, no, I want a second take. I said, a second take? Why do you want a second take? He said, that was fine. He said, but let's see if we could. Anyway, so 3 or 4 takes later, I've learned, I like this refinement thing. And I like that he's doing it. And he's got a beautiful new 4-track Studer machine that he's working. He had 2 of them. And I remember going into the booth or into his booth and watching him work. He says, you're the first announcer who's ever actually been interested in this piece of the process. I said, this is fascinating to me. I said, what are you going to do? I said, so you've got 4 tracks, music on 2, and me on 1. He said, yeah, sound effects on the other. He said, and if I need to, I'll make you the whole technical thing. I was such a geek. And so I remember I didn't go home again. I was so mad at my parents. I didn't go home again until 1984. Because they hadn't been able to get me back from Yellowknife for me to go to Fanshawe.
Like really pissed at him?
Yeah, and I was pissed because of the reason. Part of the reason was that my dad had drank those funds away.
Yeah.
And, my dad is one of these guys who, he's like a lot of very functional alcoholics in that you don't really see it until you see it. And for us, I mean, my dad had students coming back to him years later in the summer who he changed their lives. He pulled them out of academic streams they were failing in, pulled them into the technical stream. They'd gone off. They would come back with their families and come to our house and say, hey, I have you to thank for this. I have a trade. And he was like that. He was he was a great guy and a good man. And I have a feeling that so many parents of that era, particularly the fathers of that era, but moms too, self-medicated because it wasn't okay to have the conversation around, I don't know what to do with this, right? Like his older brother, who'd always been his mentor, had been a police officer in Kapuskasing. And he got fired when he started drinking too much after their mom died. He died in a horrific traffic accident. My dad had to go identify the body, and he'd been cut in half. So my dad had to kind of identify half of his brother, and he was never the same after that. And never able to talk about it. And that would have been mid-70s, so I might have been 13, 14, so he definitely wasn't going to burden me with it. And that's the whole piece, right? I don't want to burden you with my thing. And so he never really talked about it. And I think that was my mom stood by him forever and ever and ever. And then just when she was she'd gone to Al-Anon, he'd gone to AA twice, gone to rehab twice. I remember his first stint in rehab is comedy worthy. He comes home, he says, man, these people with cocaine have problems. He said, I'm good. I'm like, okay, all right. So, but his shtick was that he would not drink much during the school year, but during the summer it would kind of gradually ramp up. And then he'd have to almost dry out those first 2 weeks of school. So they'd sent him to rehab, and that was his first experience with it. But my mom eventually found, okay, well, you're not getting better. She was just on the cusp of finally leaving. And it's hard in a small town. You've grown up with everybody there. You've married this man despite your father's misgivings. There were no good places for her to turn. I have a lot of sympathy for that. I just think you kind of have to look at the whole situation. Anyway, just as she's getting ready to leave, he gets cancer. And it was misdiagnosed as a sore throat cold. So it went on for a few months. So my mom finally went to our retired family doctor. They went to his house. I love small towns, right? They went to his house. And so my family doctor, Dr. Walker, who he got me through basketball in high school, and I don't even know how. He was just like, he cut a cast off. He said, you've been playing in this cast because it stinks like a hockey bag. Don't do that again. I'm putting no more walking casts for you. Anyway, but with my dad, he said, how long have you had this? And he took one look at him, and he made a couple of phone calls. He said, you're going to Ottawa tomorrow. And that was the start of about 3 years of treatment. And it was throat cancer. And so it progressed. And so the second time they had to do a laryngectomy, and he kind of gave up after that. He couldn't talk anymore. One of the first things that people tell you when you're in radio and doing this kind of thing is, oh, you've got a great voice. It's like, yeah, it's a genetic accident, but thank you very much. And it was like the kid, he sang in a choir. I still have a 78 record, right? Like of him singing as a soprano, but he had a lower voice than mine. And, but anyway, he finally did quit drinking because, and I like telling this part of the story, but in September of 1993, he said to my mom, he said, I had told you I wouldn't be like my dad, and I broke that promise. He said, but I'm not going to touch another drop. He said, but we should go on a trip. And he hadn't told her that he felt the cancer coming back. So they went on the trip. Their honeymoon spot was Bemidji, Minnesota. Wow. For I don't know what reason. Pretty little town, sure. So they went and they got about halfway there, and he was just too sick to continue. So they came home. And then I got a call from her December 20th, I think. No, December 19th in 1993. And she said, hey, your dad's gone into the hospital and I don't think he's coming out. If you're going to come out. It was so expensive to get to Kapuskasing from Calgary. But my mother-in-law at the time said, no, you're going. So here's your ticket. And so I went. And Cap still had an airport then. And so I flew into Cap Airport. I got there at like 9 o'clock at night and I went right to the hospital. And he waited for me. And then that was it. That was the Monday night. And then Wednesday night he was gone. Yeah. So, but he maintained his promise. So I thought, okay.
Yeah, to actually say it and do it, that's
Well, and it's funny because throughout my youth, I mean, he was always kind of a nonconformist, and I don't think I really understood to what extent. But when everybody else was getting Skidoos, we couldn't afford a Bombardier snowmobile. And so my dad got a Boaski. And I'm like, Boaski? He said, I got it because it had 2 headlights. All these other ones only have 1 headlight. And they're yellow. He said, I hate yellow. So the Boaski was red. And it had 2 headlights. He almost killed me on that Boaski because we were going out to a lake, a friend's cabin, and a blizzard literally dropped on all of us. So now we're crossing a lake in a blizzard. My 2 sisters and I are on the toboggan at the back of the Boaski.
Amazing.
Yeah, my dad's at the front, my mom's on the back of the Skidoo, or Boaski, and I'm the last on the toboggan because I'm supposed to take care of my sisters. Well, we hit this bump that nobody saw, and I fall off. But the wind is howling, the snow is everywhere, and they don't even know I've dropped off. And my sisters are screaming, but they can't hear them. So they must go for like a mile on the lake. And they have to circle back for me and find me in this blizzard. We got home, and our car, which was the biggest Ford ever made, that was a car. It was the Ford LTD Brougham station wagon with the seat at the way back. It was completely buried in snow. Completely buried in snow.
Madness.
Yeah, madness. But it was great for tunnels. Like we built forts and tunnels all the time when we were kids. They would plow the streets, and of course the snowbanks would come up to like our height, and we would just like dig tunnels. And now it's kind of like, oh, that's going to cave in on you. It's like, no. You know what? There'll be somebody around.
Yeah, totally.
But our town was the kind of town that had the little metal poles on the hydrants because the hydrants would disappear.
Right.
And they would be 6 feet, these poles, and they would be easily 3 feet of snow, and they would have to like clear out.
Crazy. Like
the dugout around the, Anyway, Yellowknife, Grand Prairie. I learned a lot in Grand Prairie, but I also learned I couldn't do country music as an announcer.
Were you getting better by this time?
I was getting a little bit better.
And like, what starts making you better?
Practice, and sometimes, in my case, definitely forced humility, because I don't think I had a lot of it. I didn't have a lot of it till much later. And patience, oh my God, the patience Chuck Ingram had. Because he had me on the overnight shift, right? So I want you to imagine the overnight shift in a place like Grand Prairie, right? So you're 25,000 people at the time, a lot of money flowing around, people coming out of bars at 2, 3 in the morning. They've broken up with whoever they've broken up with, and they're calling me to play the saddest song you've ever heard.
It's like calling shit too.
Oh my God. So I would record these calls and play them on the air because they were too good not to play. And in a sense, I was kind of making fun, but in a sense, I was sympathizing. But they were like, honestly, you couldn't find sadder music ever. Yeah, I just broke up with. Like,
man.
No, I would hear the whole thing. I'd hear the whole thing. It's like, we were together at the beginning of the night, and then it was done. Can you play Convoy? No, I don't want to. Do you think maybe you should play something happier so you don't slit your wrists while I'm playing the song? And so, Mr. Compassion. Anyway, I went into Chuck and I said, I don't think I can keep doing this, Chuck. It's just so depressing. He said, well, there's an opening in the news department. I was like, okay. I thought, why not? So I go over and I meet the guy who would become like such a close friend, Michael Cohen, and a guy named Gary Freeman, who was eventually on the air here at Country 105. But at the time, he was the news director in Grand Prairie at CJXX, Mighty Double X. Anyway, this coincided with Caligula. Do you remember the movie Caligula?
No.
Released by Bob Guccione, that known movie impresario from Penthouse magazine. It was, I think it had a XX rating. Anyway, Grand Prairie's got its fair share of fairly religious people living around. And so there were protests. And so as the news reporter, off we went to cover the protests and the opening of Caligula. God. Anyway, and then of course there were town council meetings and stuff. Yeah, if you're going to learn humility, you're going to learn it covering one of those meetings because you've got to actually stay awake, one, and then be able to report on the facts later. So Gary was really patient because I'd never done it before. And I could write, which I learned there. I thought, oh, I can actually write a news story. And it wasn't very good journalistic writing, but I could string sentences together and it made sense. And so Gary was happy enough with that and that was fine. And we would go into this room. I'm trying to think, is there any space behind? So it would be a door like that and a space that was maybe 3 by 3, acoustic tile, little desk and the microphone and a desk lamp. And we would read this copy we just ripped and read and the stuff we'd written, and that would be our newscasts. And you don't appreciate when you're 20 that people count on the information, right? And so, again, you know, the only way that you acquire humility is actually going to meet people and kind of living their life. My journey from Yellowknife to Grand Prairie, I was on the bus, and I had everything I owned in one bag. And a really bad cheesy suede coat. And I discover in Grimshaw, Alberta, that I do not have a ticket all the way to Grand Prairie. So the bus driver says, see ya. So I can get off in Grimshaw. I have no idea where I am. And this farmer who's in a pale blue old Ford pickup says, I can take you as far as Fairview. It's like, okay. I have no idea how far Fairview is from Grand Prairie, so I hitchhiked with this guy, and then I hitchhiked from Fairview to Grand Prairie, and I finally got there in time to do my shift. But man, the Norm Zanoli taught me so much about how to read copy. Chuck Ingram was so patient with me as an announcer. He made me better by getting me to say less, which is the key a lot of the time. This is a recurring theme in my career. You'll hear it again in a story from Calgary. He was a tough ass of a boss, but he was probably the best thing for me at the time. And then when I left Grand Prairie, I went to Lethbridge. And Lethbridge, so your hair on a walking stereotype from disco 70s.
Amazing.
Okay. Terry Robert, I won't say his last name, that's enough. But he had more hair on his body than I've ever seen on another human being. And so he had a chest that would his hair stood out past his shirt. Amazing. And he wore a gold chain and a medallion and he called himself the Legend.
That sounds awesome.
And he was the boss. And I was just like, he hired me on the recommendation of another guy who I worked in Yellowknife with. And at Lethbridge, $1,000 a month, Burger King every night before the overnight shift. The overnight shift would end at 6, but the last half hour was a Bible program. Herbert W. Armstrong. Great voice. Horrible show. Bad organ music to start it. The whole bit. It was classic. Anyway, I would walk home in Lethbridge and think, I think this might be the end.
Because the overnights.
So you're getting off at 6. Yeah. And I'm walking home a half hour to my apartment at the edge of the city at the time. And I could literally hear the traffic lights clicking. I felt like, have you ever seen, there's a bad 70s movie, The Omega Man, with Charlton Heston? Last Man on Earth, he thinks. That's what it felt like. Except for the one guy who had a German Shepherd. Just before I crossed the last path, and he would occasionally just let his shepherd out at me. I was like, but it honestly felt like there was just nobody else alive in Lethbridge at 6 a.m, which is funny because it's a farming town. As much as it is anything else. Anyway, Mark Campbell was the morning guy there. He is still there. He was the only one of our current staff who was local. But you know what? It's like we still all keep in touch, those guys. And Kurt Andrews became, he was the evening guy. He had to play some of the only time we were allowed to play anything that had swear words in it was at night. It's all top 40. Like we're playing Quiet Riot, Come On, Feel the Noise, Duran Duran, all that stuff. Anyway, so Kurt, unbeknownst to us, had a religious streak. He became a pastor after he left radio. And he is still one of the most decent. And I'm so happy that he's got a great life. He's got grandkids now and all that stuff. Gary James went on. He was Gary Jackson in Lethbridge. I wasn't allowed to use my French name in Lethbridge.
No way.
Nope. That Mr. Gold Medallion, the legend, says, you can't use Boucher on the air here. He said, you're going to have to change your name. He said, who do you like as a musical artist? I said, well, I don't know. Like Fleetwood Mac? He said, Stevie Nicks.
I was just gonna say, out of all the random things, I was like, a Nicks?
So I became Paul Nicks for 2 years. 2 longest years of my life, only made tolerable by those guys and some of the other members of the staff. And then I moved to Medicine Hat and to work at CJCY there. And they said, oh, you can't use the same name you used in Lethbridge because we've got people who cross, So what's another name? What's your middle name? I said, Philip. And they said, Paul Phillips. Sure. Okay. So I was Paul Phillips for 3 months in Medicine Hat. And then off I went to Saskatoon. Saskatoon, at the time, the radio station was a giant. It was one of the big AM stations. And if you think back, this would have been 84. So the coverage required by Saskatoon, like Saskatchewan radio, just needed to be AM to reach all these smaller towns outside of the big places. Anyway, so I was on there as Paul Phillips. And then who got me the tip? Somebody tipped me off that it was Gary James, actually. He was still here. And he tipped me off that there was a position open at what was at the time Music 96, CHFM. I got here Christmas 84. And I will never forget driving in my beat up old 1976 Volkswagen Rabbit through a blizzard leaving Saskatchewan, hitting the Alberta border, the snow stopping, but then turning the corner. Do you remember the brick used to be on the corner of Center Street? Mm-hmm. So you couldn't see downtown until you turned the corner. Yeah. I managed to, I turned left, and Calgary was going to be the biggest place I'd ever lived in. Mm. And I turned left and saw the lions lit up on the bridge and the core and thought, oh my God, I've made it. And it didn't take long for me to feel welcome in Calgary. And the only other place I'd felt that was maybe Medicine Hat. Mm. Grand Prairie, I was like square peg, round hole. Lethbridge, not the right community for me. Yeah. And then Saskatoon, it's funny because it felt big and small at the same time. Yeah. But when I got the chance to move to a bigger city, I thought, no, this is the progression. I'm supposed to go work in ever bigger markets before I can eventually go back home and maybe go to Toronto. That was kind of the goal, right? Mm. And I'd applied in Sarnia, I think, and they just said, nah, you're not good enough. Okay. Anyway, so I get to Calgary, and the funniest thing happens. So the program director is a guy named Cal Walker, and he said my name. And he said my name differently than I've ever said my name.
Which name did he use?
Boucher.
Oh, you used your real name. You have so many aliases.
But you have to remember, so I was Paul Boucher. I grew up with Boucher. So the emphasis is more on the first syllable than the second syllable. But he said it Boucher. And I thought, man, that sounds classy. Yeah, okay, I'll use my real name here. And so that was kind of my introduction to Calgary. And also, it was working for a chain called Moffat. So they owned XL and CHFM here. They owned Ched, and I forget what the FM station was in Edmonton, but they owned Moose Jaw as well. And Moose Jaw was their farm station. The number of great announcers and bosses, program directors who came through that Moose Jaw and that Moffat system. Same kind of thing with the Rogers radio stations out of Toronto and out east and in Vancouver. Like they're still here. Like Jerry Forbes was actually the black sheep of the Forbes broadcast dynasty because his dad had run Toronto. Really? Jerry's brother Marty had been also important, running a bunch of different radio stations. So Jerry was like the morning guy. And yeah, nobody was sure of how that was going to work out. It's like, yeah, okay. Because honestly, it's one of those jobs. I'm sure a parent looks at it and go, you're going to, do you have a fallback? It's like, is this a real thing? Anyway, when I got to Calgary, it was Christmas and It was a beautiful Christmas. Like it was snow. And it was so much fun to be on that radio station because they were technologically bounds ahead. As a group, that group always embraced whatever the bleeding edge of technology was. Now, one of the things that happened in Calgary that didn't happen anywhere else was we had a guy who loved technology as much as us, who became the general manager. And we were all having to write 3, they call them foreground pieces. So the old FM rules, FM would be so much better if this was still the case, had to play 50% non-hit music. So you got to hear all this stuff, right? It was really cool. And we had a terrific music director who loved music. So he would find all this great Britpop stuff nobody was playing. Like, not that I ever want to hear Spandau Ballet True ever again, but
awesome.
He would find that. Simply Red, The Fine Young Cannibals.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
He found
all of them.
Oh, cool.
He got them so far ahead of everybody else, and he would somehow sneak them into this light music station. He'd be really careful about what he'd throw in there, but yeah, along with the Tiffany's and the Whitney Houstons and Belinda Carlisle's. At least Belinda Carlisle had a past. But you know, it was really cool to be playing this kind of music, but we had to do foreground pieces. So 3 times in a 4-hour shift, we'd have to do 3 2-minute pieces on an artist. So now Sirius, is it satellite? Is that Sirius satellite?
Yeah.
They have a whole channel for this music that we were playing. It's the Yacht Rock channel.
Cool.
Right. So Ambrosia, Pablo Cruz, all these bands, Little River Band. Anyway, we had to do 2-minute foreground pieces on these bands. So here's where Steve Boynton's education in Kapuskasing comes back to me. And I'm suddenly finding all these connections between these bands. Cool. So it was actually easy for me. And I really loved that piece of it. But to the point about me being better when I spoke less, my boss, we used to have a hotline in the control room, and it flashed a big red spotlight when it rang. And we just, oh God, it was like we felt shame. It was like immediately like slap shot, right? Like we've done something wrong, we go to the box, we feel shame, except we had no time. So the hotline rings after I've done a break before the commercial set, and I have to do the 2-minute foreground thing on the backside of the commercials, and I'm about to play Ambrosia. Anyway, and I remember only because Wayne called me up and carved me a new one. Just said, shut your mouth.
Just
He up one side, down the other, the entire 2 minutes. And he knew he had 2 minutes. So he used 1 minute and 58 seconds. And then I had to go on and do this foreground piece about Ambrosia, which, if you remember the music, it's the mellowest pablum imaginable. Good as it was still like great. And I have to play How Much I Feel. And I have to talk about yacht rock. And not feel like I've just had my back stripped off. Anyway, we used to submit ourselves to air check sessions with the boss. And so I took in the air check from that shift into his office, and he went over that break again. He said, what the fuck was that? I said, well, you told me to have personality. He said, you've got personality. You're an asshole. Shut up. I want time, temperature, weather. That's it from you. Except for the foreground. At the same time that I have this guy who, to be fair, was right, coaching me this way, I had him in Batia coaching me every day for commercials. We actually that year submitted pieces that I'd written and pieces that I'd voiced to the Clio Awards when they were actually a thing. So the Clio Awards in New York were the world's best commercials. North America. It's the typical NFL thing. It's like the world championship. It's not. But still, it was New York. I'd never been to New York. And so we actually, I think, came 2nd or 3rd runner-up.
Cool.
And none of it would have happened without him. He coached a guy named, I don't know if you grew up with Excel at all, but Gentleman Jim Jackson, who used to be on in the afternoons, worked with Laura Knope, as a matter of fact. But his voice, my God, he could do so many things with his voice. And he had a completely different delivery when he was like putty in Amin's hands to deliver these beautiful narratives. And I had written one about the snow, and he'd narrated it. And that was the one that we'd sent off. And it came back 3rd runner-up. And I thought, that's okay being 3rd in the world. That's okay. Yeah. I'm all right with that. And so you have so many, people who teach you things. Janet Connerton now, Janet Weir at the time, was a really brilliant writer. But Janet, I found, never really had a ton of confidence because she was always being berated by people who looked different than her. You know, she was an athletic, bigger woman, but my God, could she write? She wrote some of the most beautiful copy I've ever read. She wound up being an instructor in Mount Royal. And then she only left Mount Royal because they suddenly became a university and they needed all the profs to have a degree, right? And she didn't have one. But that's how good she was. She just kind of graduated to that level. There's so many people. Chris Kennedy was the music director. And maybe the coolest guy walking I think I've ever seen. Like blade thin, looked like Grace Jones's lost son. But he dressed impeccably, was just a good guy and had the best taste in music. That station was so much better as long as he was there. And then Cal Walker was, again, indulgent and patient as we all worked. We were all getting better.
Yeah.
And then Amin turned me on to the freelance thing. And so I kept doing radio. And then I got a chance to go to Montreal. And I thought, well, this is it. I'm going home. But by this point, I'm married. And the deal with my wife and I at the time was whoever was making the most money got to dictate where we lived. She'd entered this deal thinking that she was in for a raise, I think, is what happened. And she would have actually got it like the following month. Anyway, I'd been hired to do the bilingual bobsled announcing for the Olympic Games. So this is Christmas '87. And I explained to the folks at the games that I've been hired in Montreal. They said, no problem, we'll fly you back. I was like, okay. So I left Christmas '87, left and went to Montreal, and was promptly really disappointed with Montreal in almost every way. Technically, Calgary had been so far ahead. Everything was new. All the buildings were new. Everything just worked.
Yeah.
It was like, Calgary was like the apple of cities. It just worked. Montreal, oh my God. We were in Westmount, this radio station. So Mila Mulrooney shot down the street, like those kinds of things. Yep. But I learned very quickly, oh yeah, this is the rich Anglophone enclave in Montreal, but you're 2 blocks from the Forum, which is great. Mm-hmm. Yeah, really cool. And then the other side is French Montreal. So Montreal is divided kind of like Calgary is with Centre Street. They have Boulevard Saint Laurent. So French to the east, Anglo or bilingual at least to the west. And so it was a really interesting place to be. I came back, I did the Olympics. I was so happy to be back in Calgary for those 2 weeks. And then back to Montreal I went. And there's some great things about Montreal. I learned, you always learn. I was mouthy. And because I was bilingual, but I was a Canadian bilingual, none of this piquist, like language supremacy, cut it out. And so I would say things on the air and the general manager would kind of walk in, you can't say that. Please don't say that again. But I would have to, they sent me out all the time because I could speak both languages. And I would get stuff like, you're a traitor, you're working for the English station, you bastard. It's like, you play French music, but you don't know it. Okay. So in Quebec, on top of the 30% Cancan, we did 30% French music. Even growing up, so my parents, Marty Robbins, that was my dad's side. My mom was Nana Muscuri. I grew up with the Partridge Family and the Osmonds before the English kids who had older brothers said, have you ever heard of the Rolling Stones or Supertramp or any of those? No idea. Anyway, so, but in Montreal, the French music was the education and the jazz festival. When the jazz festival hit, it was comparable to, I've never seen anything like Stampede. Stampede for me still stands out as the most all-encompassing civic experience I've ever lived through. The jazz festival was close in Montreal. And things happened at that festival, just like they happened at Stampede, that you go, can I tell that story? I don't know if I can tell that story. So one night we were going to go see Al Di Meola at 10, great jazz guitarist, and then Jimmy Cliff was playing at midnight, same theater. Théâtre Saint-Denis, French Montreal. There's a big apartment building next to this thing, and it's a reggae act. It's going to be late. So it's now 1. We're still waiting for Jimmy Cliff to come on. And in the apartment building on the fire escape going down, we suddenly, it's a leopard with a collar And yeah. So we just won't make any ruckus at all. We'll just wait to get into our concert. But there were so many, like, culturally, I saw the birth of Cirque du Soleil in Montreal. Their first big show was actually at the Old Port. Old Montreal is beautiful. Saw Quebec City. Had some fun with some calèche drivers in Quebec City who didn't know that I understood French, so they bad-mouthed English tourists the entire time. And then, of course, they're back holding their hand out for a tip at the end of it, so I spoke to them in French. And I said, listen, I'm going to tell you guys that you lost this whole city from behind a 40-foot citadel because your soldiers were hung over to a bunch of really, really tired English guys who had just scaled a cliff. You kind of deserved what you got. And they were like, they were so mad. So they didn't get a tip. And we went to the Citadel. Like, Quebec City is beautiful. But yeah, people have odd, either a complete lack of awareness of Western Canada. Like Michael, my friend Michael Cohen actually was from Montreal. He had to go home for surgery. And so he had a good friend who worked in East End Montreal. So he's fluently bilingual, but he's working in the shadow of the Big O, which is still to this day the biggest public white elephant ever. And I said to him, why don't you come out to Calgary with your electronics business? And I said, it's so new. I said, everybody's buying this stuff. He said, what's in Calgary? And that was when I knew I need to get back. Shortly after that, my wife and I got pregnant. She got pregnant. I hate that expression. We're pregnant. Not unless you're squeezing it out. No, the species would be extinct if we had to do this. It's just the way that works. But I remember Wes Erickson, who was the program director at KIC, coming out to Montreal to interview me because his wife was from Montreal. They were visiting her parents. And he just put it as succinctly as he could in that lunch. He just said, listen, Montreal's a great place to visit. I always like when I come here, but Calgary is a great place to live. And my wife's parents were here. We had no real support for the baby. I mean, so we came back. And I like to think, we came home. And so I've been in Calgary ever since. So that was September 89.
You said this a couple of times, just like either you talk too much or something. Like you're alluding to something of like, was it bravado? What was behind all of it?
So much of it is
because it's interesting. Because how you and I have hung out, well, damn near through whatever the amount of time now. I've never once thought this guy's a fucking full of himself. It's never entered my mind. So like,
there's been some things that kind of enforced humility along the way, and we can talk about that. But I think that there was a real attention seeking in a lot of radio people for a very long time,
for sure.
And a lot of the people that you find in the industry have that in common. They just want to stand out.
Yeah.
I think once I'd started to kind of earn some freelance income, and so I wasn't as dependent on the radio thing, I started to notice how we were not treated that well. And I found the industry was full of people who had ascended to positions of management who likely wouldn't be put in charge of a pig pen. Like, just a bad idea that these people are in charge. One of them actually hired Howard Stern for Q107 in Toronto. He'll remain nameless. But he did actually, he's an interesting dude, obviously smart enough in their own ways, but I just didn't understand the logic that accompanied a lot of decisions in radio. And I was never very adept politically because I was too mouthy and too arrogant and, lacked humility. So after being back in Calgary in 89, I think it would have been the mid 90s, I think, when I understood that I could maybe do this freelance thing full time. Because by that point, do you remember channels 2 and 7 before they became global? Yeah. So I was their promo voice.
Yeah, and that's why. And then when I first met you, I'm like, I've heard the name forever. Yeah. Because I'm born and raised here, so it's like I've heard the name forever. So yes, I do remember. Yeah. Those old places.
Well, it's so funny because so many of those people now, I've still done some work for Grant Nolan, who was one of the writers up at 2 and 7, but it was that gig by itself brought me to, at the time, the GST income threshold. I had to start charging GST. I was like, oh, okay. So now I'm approaching my radio salary, and I'm thinking, okay. And so when I'd had a few disagreements with the management.
Yeah.
And I'd been vocal about them because they were not okay. Like there was an instance where, and this happens still to this day, where if you've got a radio station that owns multiple properties in the city, they'll get you to do a commercial that airs on all of those properties.
Okay.
Well, that effectively eliminates you from the market as a freelance voice. So I was lucky that I had this long form narration business, but I really wanted to do more commercial. But what I said to them was, I said, I think you should pay us for commercials that go off the station, just like a client would pay me. And they were like, no.
It makes sense from the outside.
It does, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I finally, this same guy, this same general manager, I said to him, I said, listen, nobody's not going to buy time on your radio station because Paul Boucher is not voicing their commercial. I said, but I will not be able to get work on the outside if I'm on all of these commercials that go off the station.
Yeah.
And he understood that. And so he finally agreed that I would only do commercials that aired only on, at the time it was Power 107. Right. And it was a good way to end my radio career because we ended as the #1 station in the country, and I was the #1 DJ in the midday slot. So it was a great way to kind of say, see ya, except that they said see ya, because I kept saying no to them.
Just anything they wanted to ideas?
We'd like to have you on location at Mark's Work Warehouse on the weekend. Yeah. And I'm like, no, for $107 for 4 hours? No. And they were like, so they've just, their whole thing was, well, you say no to us a lot. It's like, yeah. I said, but you guys aren't willing to pay us more.
Yeah. Come with something better.
And what the funny thing was, they always paid the morning guy more because he was the morning guy. Anyway, so it went. And so they understood that my wife and I were expecting a baby the following month. We had just signed the mortgage papers, and that's when they chose to let us go. So
in that moment, what's run? And you have this other business.
Well, do you remember the Yellowknife moment?
Yeah.
Where I landed and thought, oh my God, same moment. But again, through luck.
Yeah.
And there's always a combination of luck and being good at something and the work that goes along with it.
Yeah.
You're a prime example with what you're doing here. And so what I did was so I wasn't even allowed on the air on my shift. My wife was she was 8 months pregnant, working at Bennett Jones at the time. And she suddenly doesn't hear me come on the air and just knows. So she's trying to reach me, but I'm busy because I'm calling every studio that I've done work for, every client, saying, hey, I'm available full time now. And
I'm sorry, this is a me thing.
It's a me thing. And it was so great because there was a woman named Nora, worked at the Beach, which was owned by a guy named Lanny Williamson forever, right? Anyway, Nora said, I will get you whatever I can get you. And so I started picking up enough work that I was making at least my old radio salary.
Yep.
And with the settlement that I got from the radio station, they were so funny. They're like, we think this will be enough. I said, no, 89 to 99.
A decade.
Wow. Yeah. It was Kick when I got there, Calgary Classic Rock. Then they abandoned Classic Rock. CJ took it over. Promptly took over the universe. We became Rock 107. Poor ass alternative station because nobody really liked the alternative music that they were having to program. And then we became Power 107.
Gotcha.
But we became Power 107 with the censored versions because we had a Bible thumping program director. I have censorship of any kind, like my mom being a librarian, man, the whole banning of books thing, anything like that is just so short-sighted and misinformed on so many levels. People are going to find what they want to find anyway. But so I remember playing these bleeped music of alternative songs. I'm like, the whole point of alternative music is this, right? And they were like, we can't, these families have their kids in the car in the morning. And I'm like, okay, listen, dude, I don't care. They'll turn off and we'll gain new listeners because we're actually playing the music.
Yeah, doing the thing.
Yeah.
So a decade at a place, it's a shift, obviously.
Yeah.
Then to get fired.
It stung.
Yeah.
But it came at a time when I had confidence from the freelance thing.
There was enough points on the board, data points. You're like, no, I think.
Well, yeah, but I was also freaked out because we knew we had a baby due in a month.
It's a whole different
I was in a condo, so we had to buy a house. Bought a little house in Tuxedo. I was like, thank God. And then so we have the house, but I had done this before. I have a son who is 36 from a first marriage, but my wife had not done this before. So she was a nervous new mother. And so we were in the attic in this tuxedo house, and that's where our bedroom was. But there was no room for a crib because we were on the slope of the roof, right? So she was on the first floor. My wife was convinced that terrorists were going to come by and steal our blonde white baby from the, and I'm like, okay. So there was only a power outlet on my side of the bed, which meant the baby monitor was on my side of the bed, which meant that the baby monitor was up really loud so she could hear in case terrorists came to the window and quietly unlatched and took our daughter. So beside me every night from the baby monitor. And I started wearing earplugs. I still wear them to this day to sleep. But clearly we got through that because she's the one who'll be a lawyer at the end of the month. Yeah, no. And you know what? I have to say, I think it was the birth, my daughter Jay and my son Reed, it was late coming, humility.
Yeah.
But that's what did it. Yeah. I don't think there's a photo of Jay and I in our second house that we owned as a family. And there were like 5 apple trees at the bottom of the property. It's right on the corner of Cambrian Drive, which becomes Northmount. Okay. Right? But it's got a retaining wall we learned that we had to replace when we first got there. It's like, he said, oh, you're cracking the sidewalk. It's like, it's in the caveat on the property. Oh, great. More lessons learned. But Jay, I think I finally thought, oh, that's what unconditional love is. And I hadn't had it with my first son because his mom and I had split up about a year into it. Yeah. And so I didn't see him again until he was really 8. And I was never really a big part of his life until the pandemic when he suffered this horrible brain injury. He literally fell back in his kitchen. Back of his head hit slate tile. He'd had a few concussions before. His wife, thankfully, Kendall, had heard him fall. And so she kind of came out and he's like just kind of scrambling to get up. And she's like, you okay? He says, yeah, I just hit my head. He said, I just want to go to bed. They both worked in hospitality. He both working at Joey Tomatoes in New Westminster. So he would get home late. He'd play video games, have a little bit of whatever. I'm sure he had a head rush, and that's what caused it. He's 6'5". Yeah. He just fell back from that height, and his head. Anyway, so she said, no, you've had concussions. You're not going to bed. Just like go like towel off your face, and we'll stay up for a bit. Anyway, so he splashes his face, and she asks him another question, and nothing like English comes out. She immediately calls 911. He died at the bottom of the elevator ride in the ambulance. He died again when they got him to New Westminster. They took the top of his skull off to let his brain swell, and they called the family in. They just said, listen, ICU rules are typically, only one person in the pandemic, but we don't think he's going to make it. 1% of people recover from these injuries. Man, there's comedy in everything, but you walk in and you see your son and he's sitting in a hospital bed. He's kind of half upright. They've got him kind of propped up, but they've got a towel over his head. And I'm like, am I looking at the House of Frightenstein? Like, why is his brain, you could see the brain pulsing. Anyway, he was hooked up to more equipment than I've seen terminal patients hooked up to. But they just said, he's stable now, but say your goodbyes. And so that was really the first time in a long while that I'd seen that whole side of the family. Yeah. And they were super gracious and let me in. And so we were all in there first night. Second night, he was stable. So they kind of had, let's have a few fewer people in at the time. And then by the third day, only 2 people at a time were allowed. And his mom was super gracious because she would say, you've traveled, you go in. So I would go in and I would read. So I'm reading a book called The 15 Lives of Harry August to him. And I don't know if you've ever read that book, but it's just a story about a guy who dies and keeps reliving, but he keeps learning in every life. So I thought, man, it seems apt. Anyway, the nurse keeps coming in and out as I'm reading the book. More comedy. She says, you should really think of doing this for a living. And I'm like, thank you. Got it. I'll consider that. Anyway, so 30 days later, 30 days in a coma. And I come back out again because I'd gone home by this point. And I come back out to New West. Fortunately, New West is also the center of the neurological hospital in BC. So he was in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
Anyway, they say, listen, we're going to put the top of his skull back on and we're just going to see what happens. So I get there like 3 o'clock in the afternoon and he's in recovery and I'm allowed in to see him. And he gains consciousness. He knows me, but doesn't know who I am. Mm-hmm. And he knows Kendall, but doesn't know who she is. But within about a week, he wanted a burger. And there was nothing that was going to stop him from getting a burger. They had to handcuff him to the bed because he couldn't eat solid food yet. It's like, no, Jesus. Dude, you're not quite right yet. Anyway, he's got some mobility issues on his right side and the right hand. As a sous chef, that kind of killed that part of his career. Mm-hmm. But he was telling me he's got a job interview today. So this has been a long time coming. One of the consequences of a brain injury a lot of the time during recovery is epilepsy, which he had. Mm-hmm. So he can't drive. But he's adapted so well. And now he and his wife are planning a family. Mm-hmm. So I'm just so grateful because it is a bit of a miracle story. You just think that's... Whatever's looking out for the two of us, clearly, because he's obviously learned some things from his dad about being stupid. He's actually done better on the stupid front than I have, though. More adventurous. But anyway, but with Jay being born, I suddenly had, and I felt this. So Jay was born in 1999. And this didn't happen with Gil until 2021, September 2021. And, or it might have been 2020. Anyway, I had a mulligan and I understood it in a very granular way. I thought, I can't screw this up. And so it was good, for Heather at the same time that I wanted to be so involved because anytime I could, I would. And I was already doing freelance. So I had more time. Mm-hmm. And then eventually when the studio moved to the house, I still had more time. Mm-hmm. So I would do things like play trains with Reed and I would read stories to these kids. I've got them both recorded from the home studio when they were both really young. Cool. And I actually played, I was like a guest in the class, what are your parent comes to work school. And so I played a snippet of Jay preschool, in the booth. And she was just so embarrassed. But I said, so this is what we do for a living. And she went on to dance. She was just a really, really lovely and talented dancer to the point where we sent her to the School of Boston Ballet when she was like 11. She went with a couple of her cohort from Airborne Dance Studio, which was just a great home for her. And I said to her, at the end of the 5 weeks, right, it's a residency, so she's there, staying at the School of Boston Ballet. So I remember at the time we were doing well enough that I rented a house for Heather and Reed, and they went off to Boston just in case Jay wanted to see Mom. And they went all over the Eastern Seaboard. They went to Salem. They went to Cape Cod. They did all this cool stuff. And Reed was a train fanatic, so he's doing everything by train. So it was just such a great time in our lives. But I remember getting to the end of her school thing. And I said, so what did you think? She said, well, I know I don't want to be a ballet dancer. And you have to think, here's a kid who is so self-possessed at 11 to say, I really enjoyed the experience, but these people are nuts. And I love other kinds of dance. And she was good at other kinds of dance. So the ballet school made her better. But I thought, you know what? If that's the outcome, I'm okay with that. Like that she knows in her own self that that's not what she wants to do. Yep. Cool. So back we came. And Reed was like me. He wasn't really good at anything for a long while except trains. He was really good at trains. And he also loved, oh my God, the stories we read together. Like both kids would kind of come sit and I would just read. Cool. And so I have a gig now replacing the narrator in a kid's series, Benjamin the Elephant. And it's just like revisiting that part of my adulthood.
You got a lot of practice.
It's honestly the best part of, I think it's the best part of my adult life, that experience of fatherhood with these two. But yeah, Reed finally said to me, he'd failed, like swimmer 1, swimmer 2, swimmer 3. He said, I think I'd like to do what you did and go into a swim club. I said, well, it would help if you could swim 25 meters. That's a start. So he swam 25 meters and they accepted him into the Killarney Swim Club. And it was a really good place for him because it was competitive, but it was also about building a whole person around, being good to your teammates, knowing how to be part of a team, all of that. Stuff that we didn't get in the swim club in Kapuskasing except organically.
Yeah.
Anyway, he became a really good little competitive swimmer and he swam until he was 17. And then when he was 18, he and I went on, I think, the best adventure of my life so far. We hiked a part of the Camino in northern Spain. So, and I outlasted him, which is like forever bragging rights, right? Like,
old man.
I'll be on my deathbed and I'll be saying, I still outwalked you. Because, yeah, I walked 208 kilometers. He walked 168 and he had to bail.
Crazy.
Yeah. But he was 18 and he didn't want to come home. He said, the way that people live here is the right way to live. And I found that again when I was in Spain just recently. Yeah.
It's a coincidence. It's probably not a coincidence.
No, exactly. And, the kids, it's funny. There are things that make you better at what you do kind of accidentally. I've been hired to do things like the Stampede Western Art Auction. And I was just the MC. I was never the auctioneer. And, boy, you watch auctioneers work and that's a whole different class of whatever it is that they do. And so I have a lot of respect for that. But I remember thinking, I don't really want to do a lot of live events. It's a lot of work compared to especially the freelance stuff that was happening. So I did it a couple of years. And then that was kind of the last live event I did until quite recently when, do you know Jonathan Love?
No.
Heebie-Jeebies? Well, see, he's one of them.
Okay.
Yeah, so Jonathan would know Dowie, but Jonathan is one of a very typical Calgary artist. I'm a one-trick pony. I can read words, 2 languages, so maybe a 2-trick pony. People like Dowie and Jonathan can play music, can sing, can compose, can adjudicate music competitions. Oh, and I'm just going to do this little CBC broadcast gig on the side because I can do that too. So Jonathan, I think now is one of the people who handles the programs at the Jubilee Auditorium.
Okay.
But he and another voice actress in the market, Cheryl McMaster. Cheryl is somebody else who is typical of Canadian artists, right? It's kind of like, yeah, we've got this gig, but we have to do the bar gig first. We have to do this first. We have to do this first. It's never just one thing. I have been so lucky. I'd say blessed, but I'm sure I have a bench in hell for me. So I've been really, really lucky so many times in my life that, well, I can't really account for it. So I'm really hoping it holds out. But Cheryl would call and say, hey, we're doing this gig for the CPA up in Edmonton. I said, and the CPA is what to me? Chartered Professional Accountants. It's their graduation ceremony and it's their catch-up after COVID because they couldn't have it. So Jonathan and I will host one, but we'd like you and another co-host to host the other. So this gig will cover your hotel in Edmonton. How's the Hotel McDonald? Oh, I'm good. That'll work. And then you've got a per diem for food. Okay. And we'll pay you X for the gig. It was ludicrous. It was great, but it was ludicrous. No live event gig I've ever done has paid that well. I thought, I don't have to work till Wednesday now. This is great. Right? So I'm doing this gig and all it is, we're sitting backstage, like you dress well, but you're sitting backstage and you're reading their names. Now, to be fair, there is not a Smith or a Humphreys in that bunch. I'd be lucky if there was a Boucher in that bunch. There's many multi-syllabic names, and they're all, it's amazing when you realize, oh, this is why I have a Hindi accountant. Because immigrants come in and acquire a profession as quickly as they can or encourage their kids to. I can't tell you how many of these people become CPAs and how many of them wind up not only starting businesses, but running businesses, learning from that, mentoring business people, being fractional CFOs, like just crazy stuff. Anyway, we're sitting backstage and I'm reading their names and reading a short bio.
As they're walking across?
As they're walking across. It's like one of those moments where you think, I can't believe I get paid for this. And yes, we do it well and we have some fun with it and we kind of make it come alive and stuff. But it's one of those things. I think now the comparison would be if you had AI do the same thing, they would get everything wrong. Yeah. Certainly the names.
Yeah.
But it's not until you hear a human person who actually cares, like who's invested. Like, you have to be respectful. These people have worked their ass off for 2 years to get this designation. And that's really the beginning of their journey, right? Yeah. So yeah, you're respectful and you realize I'm part of a special moment for them. You better make it good. And so you approach everything like that. This gig that I had to return to I was in Spain for 2 weeks and this Irish client who does work for a Texas oil company, 14 short films. So 14 short films. And so the way I was taught, you put every film into its own thing, its own little kind of cubby. And then there were 5 sentences that I had to replace in each of these films. Well, it took almost 12 hours, but it just is what it is. And you think, when these guys get this back, it has to be exactly the length that they needed. Yep. It has to have the intonation they needed. And I've done enough oil and gas narration that I know how important the safety component is. And there are evolving safety practices on oil and gas platforms in the North Sea. There's not a lot of room for error. So again, you're taught humility and you're taught by all the different people that you work with. I remember Peter Temple, the first guy who first hired me. He'd hired me for another gig years later, and I showed up and nobody was there. It was a house. We were doing a video shoot. Nobody was there, so I left. I got the angriest phone call from him. He said, dude, I booked you for the day. I don't care if you sit your ass in your car all day until I get there. Your ass is mine until 5. Okay.
Noted.
Yeah. And so, he kept me on the gig, but he easily could have fired me. And so I've had so many instances like that, that honestly, there's just no accounting for how long you can be really average or sub-average at something until you finally develop a level of proficiency. And you get to be good enough at it that you can actually own, I'm good at this.
Yep.
No false modesty, which is another big flaw of people who need attention a lot. And that was a big problem of mine for a long, long time. But you eventually, it's like you meet people like Vince, for example. So for people who haven't listened to your podcast or haven't met somebody like Vince, so Vince is a guy who's lived some life, and just on the basis of his time in Afghanistan and the fact that he's been able to build a business coaching career, and he's got all these insights he's gleaned from other people, the amount he reads, the fact that he's got a successful family, which he's had to work at. You run into people like that, and they inform everything. This book, I'm doing an audiobook now, and this guy, he doesn't have military experience, but he's got hard experience with billions of dollars on the line. And he still says the most important thing you can do is love the people you work with, communicate well with the people you work with, learn how to write. Read everything you can get your hands on. And if you don't read, subscribe to Audible. Get information from every source you can to make you a more well-rounded human being. And, you hear that enough times in enough different ways from enough different people who have completely different backgrounds. And I think I'm a 7-time guy. I think that's how long it takes me to learn things. So 7 is sometimes being shy. I can't express enough gratitude for the people who have 7 times told me something, the same thing in different ways until I understood it, or allowed me to experience something until I understood it. Another quick example to go back to Calgary, my formation in Calgary, the guy named Roy Hennessy was our general manager, and he saw us writing these foreground pieces. He would see us slaving away in these IBM Selectric typewriters, right? Whiteout tape. Amazing. He said, okay, that's it. You guys are off these things. He said, you guys are going to get laptop computers. It's 1985. There are no laptop computers. So what do we get? Tandy, Radio Shack computers, 8-line screen. I think it was a 1900 baud modem, little rubber peg legs that you put into this thing to give it an incline. But we all had email addresses in 1985.
Wild.
And some of us just dove into this world because we thought, oh, this is, because we had, as an example, we had USA Today a day ahead of publication. So we were ahead of everybody in Calgary with our show prep. We had stuff that wasn't going to come out until later that day. And we all had it at our, like I had a CompuServe email address. It's CompuServe, AOL, and Prodigy. Those were the big three. And then when I got the kick, the web was starting to happen. And I was enough of a geek that I thought, this is cool. And this is again formed by an earlier experience. My mom, as the librarian, I went to visit her and she has this beige IBM PC in her office. I'm like, what's that? She says, oh, it's a computer, the interlibrary loan computer. I said, well, what does it do? It's just green C blinking on the screen, right? And she says, oh, well, with that computer, I can order books from any participating library in Ontario, and they can come to Kapuskasing if we don't have it. I said, so I no longer have to go to school in Southern Ontario if I want to get access to the same information? She says, well, that might be pushing it. But she said, we can get those resources. They take about a week to get here, and you've got them for a period of months, and then you have to send them back. And that computer does that. So I sat down and I start like hammering away at this thing, trying to make it do something. She said, well, you have to know how to use it. So she gives me the manual. And that to me is my foundational layer thinking about the internet, is its capacity. And this is a bit like your other guest, Michelle Morgan, talking about the social activism piece.
Yep.
All of these platforms, there's a great book by Cory Doctorow called Enshittification. If you haven't read this book, oh my God, because it's very true. Google started out as an awesome search engine after we'd been dealing with Lycos and Alta Vista and all these other things. And then Facebook came along. It was good at the beginning. And both platforms now collude to do evil. Never mind do no evil. It's kind of like they started by serving their customers. Then they screwed their customers and realized their real customers were the ad people. And then they screwed their ad people when they started they actually have an agreement that they were sued for, that they wrote together. So they would buy time on each other's respective networks to push out the other advertisers to force them to spend more money. This book, if you use any of these platforms, and it's platforms that kind of cause the problem. This book, Enshittification, he coined the term, and it's apt. Anyway, the internet for me was always more of a good thing than a bad thing. And it was all because of that dumb interlibrary loan computer.
Random.
Right? Yeah, totally random. And even now, I think in 2001, I built a server with the help of a friend who actually knew what he was doing. But there was no YouSendIt, there was no Dropbox, there was none of that stuff. And I was already dealing with international clients. How do you get them the files? Well, we have an FTP server. It's like, you just run into the right people at the right time.
Yeah.
Dan Wilmot is another one. We were the first two independent freelance voiceover people to have an ISDN box. The ISDN box, you know how CBC does remote interviews? They now do them over the internet, but it used to be that they had these boxes, and they were the only ones who had them that could do remote interviews in real time. And there was always a bit of a lag. You could hear the lag sometimes, but we were the first two to get one. So we got one in Calgary, and our first client was Disney. And we were like, okay, all right. Because they were filming Honey, I Shrunk the Kids up here, and they needed the two kids to do a promo back to California, and they didn't want to fly them. So they used our gear, and we thought, oh my God. Of course, the double-edged sword is now that means that local studios who get the gear can hire voices from everywhere. But we always thought, you know what? There's way more customers than there are studios in Calgary. This balance still tips in our favor. So honestly, the technical stuff that I've learned along the way, it's all learned, borrowed. The business stuff was fascinating to me. I got a head start on Outlook because I'd narrated how to use the program.
Hilarious.
And so I turned it into a mini CRM back in 1998, where I was actually, assigning tasks to clients and following up and doing all the stuff that you do. And it was like, oh, okay. And I would send out like follow-up emails, and it was all, I loved doing that stuff. And I realized, I love this part almost as much as I love the other part. So that was important. And then I had a business coach, and I had my most important mentor in my career was a woman named Sandy Sloan. So I had just got the biggest gig of my career, a Toyota US commercial contract. So this is the kind of gig that people in Calgary don't see, because they're usually cast in LA and New York. But SAG was on strike. I was a member of ACTRA. This was problematic, but not that problematic, because they said, okay, well, listen, the gig, I initially thought it was going to be like 10 grand, which was already big money for me. And they said, no. You're going to be doing the initial national spot and the national radio spot. And then you're going to punch in and do the same 8-second insert for all of the local dealerships across the US. So for 22 days, I did the same commercial with a different insert. Started on the East Coast, worked all the way to the West Coast. Started at 8 in the morning, finished at 6 at night. And it was $300,000 in 22 days. It was unimaginable money. Like my dad, who actually had a real job, contributed meaningfully to people's lives, made $50,000 a year as a teacher, right? And here, he wasn't alive, but man, I'm sure he was spinning in his grave thinking, oh my God.
How is it possible?
How is it possible? But that was 2001. And that is another example of, like your horizons are changed by that kind of a gig. And you realize, this is possible. And I've never had another single strike like that, but that revenue figure was common for until I'd say the last 2 years. Yeah. And so really, really lucky, good, but lucky to be where we are with oil and gas companies needing so much narration. I did my fair share of on-camera work. I just auditioned for another weird thing on camera.
Amazing.
And I thought, there's an NDA, so I can't say anything about it. But yeah, just like, really? And I'm not too old for this yet. It's like the hair is not a little gray. They're like, no, you'll be fine. Plus we need somebody bilingual. And so there it is again, right? Like here's this happy accident of birth leading to me getting either both halves of a contract or a half I wouldn't have otherwise.
The happy accidents piece, it makes sense to me. Sometimes it's tough to operate in that space though, to like trust it, to like think, you know what I mean? Like to think that you're actually, I don't know how you feel day to day or month, year to year of like, you just trust you get more work. You trust some connection is going to turn to something. Like it's that, when you're doing your own thing, it's kind of niche, like.
Yeah, a little niche.
And the happy accents though, they keep showing up. Do you think about it?
Trust it.
Yeah.
In the way that you might
don't bank on it, right? It's not like
you can't, right?
Yeah.
But it took me a long time to be able to go on vacation, right? But when Sandy, after the Toyota gig, I remember thinking, I can take Christmas off. This is awesome. I can actually be off during Christmas and just really enjoy the kids. And so I did that. And so Jay would have been 2 and 3 that time. So really good to be off. But at that time, there's a studio called SyncSpot. I don't know if I've got a hair there. There was a studio called SyncSpot. And that's where I wound up subletting space after the Toyota gig. I put an ISDN box in their studio and I exchanged the space at the back that they weren't using in exchange for them using the gear, because they were expensive boxes at the time. And so it bought me like a few years rent. It was great. So, but they also had cardboard box, typical, like, we got a bunch of, all the demos are in there. Like, okay. So one of the demos was the Sloan Talent Group. And I see Rick Moranis, Long John Baldry, and this woman, Sandy Sloan. And I think, she's a voice-only agent in Toronto. And there aren't many of them. Like, they usually do more film and TV because it's a bigger moneymaker, but she's voice-only. So I write to her and I ask her if she'd be interested in being on the roster. And so this is 2001. And she's like, I can't do anything for you in Calgary from Toronto. What would I do for you? She has no idea. I wrote her again. And I said, listen, I have an outsized piece of business I could offer you. And I think I could learn a lot from you. And I think you might enjoy the weird business that I've got going. So she eventually says, we're going to come out to Toronto. I said, well, listen, if I'm going to come out to Toronto to meet anyway, why don't I rent an apartment for a month? And I hit the streets with a list you give me, and I'll just meet clients, drop off demos, shake hands, kiss babies, that whole thing. And she's like, nobody does that in Toronto. I'm like, well, then I guess we'll run laps around them, won't we? And she's like, oh my God, she's laughing at me, but she says, you know what? Why not? So I rented an apartment for a month, and she gave me a list every day, and I would just hit this list every day. But she didn't understand that the stakes were so great for me in Toronto, because you're hitting Canadian Tire does. Sears was still around. Like the potential pieces of business were so big.
Yep.
It was totally worth the trip. And she was so impressed that she took me on as an agent. And once she kind of saw the scope of the business, she said, there is nobody in Canada like you. She said, you are a unicorn. There's nobody else I know who can make this revenue from long form narration, nor would they have the stomach for it.
Yeah.
Like the stuff you narrate,
Yeah.
we're going to have trouble finding people to replace you when you go on vacation. Like, oh, okay. And a good example was I was doing work for GE. Usually pretty technical. There was either like voltage, power plant stuff or medical stuff. And one guy filled in for me while I was away for a week. And he said, don't ever make me do that again. He said, I don't know how you do this day in and day out. But I'm so curious because my mom encouraged me to read.
Yeah. It's all like where you are right now is all built on all these weird things.
It is. It's exactly right. And so you can take credit for running with it, maybe when the opportunity happens, right? Like, and you're right. There have been like finding the disc, acting on it, getting Sandy to be my agent. Yeah. And then in 2007, I was complaining to her about having to organize things for the bookkeeper. She said, well, this is dumb. She said, why don't I just become your manager? I've got a bookkeeper here and we can do all your invoicing from here. I'm like, oh, hallelujah. So she was my manager for a long time until about 2018. And then she retired. And I have missed her partly because I work best in a cage. I have to be the one to build the cage. I've discovered that it's better if I build the structure. Yeah. But if I'm accountable to something or someone, I'm better. Yeah. It's hard to be accountable to just yourself. And you know this. Like you work with a business partner. So it's great to have somebody say, did you do this yet? Yeah. I was like, right? And so Sandy knew so much. Her husband was an ex-speedboat racer who'd lost a leg in a race in Italy, but he'd started 30 or 40 different companies. He knew more about business. I met him, and the first night I met him, he said, so what's your exit plan? I'm like, fuck. What? And so, again, you meet somebody like that. He said, you need to read this book and this book and this book. He said, then we can have a conversation. Okay. So, and then you do the work, right? Like you do what people tell you that you should do. And you're only sad because you didn't meet them sooner. But then you realize, I wasn't ready to meet them sooner. Yeah. You look back at kind of the litter of the trail of people that you've kind of left in your wake or the people that you've just mistreated. And you think, man, I really do wish, there was some kind of mechanism. It would be a great book, if you could actually have a little pause before death where you could say, really sorry about that. And I'm glad that you've had a good life, those atonements. I couldn't get through the book Atonement. Could not do it. I just thought, nope. I have way too many of things to do. Can't do it. He's a great writer. That's Ian McEwan, right? But you just no.
Too close.
Too close. And so, there. And Calgary is a special place because there's always somebody who can do it. You always run into somebody who did it, despite the odds.
Yep.
And so the energy of this place, I don't think I could have been this successful in Montreal, like where there were so many people waiting for their agents to call them. I don't think I would have been this successful in Vancouver. I would have been defeated, I think, in Vancouver by the kind of thing that Ryan's had to live through.
Yep.
I know a lot of people in the business who really struggle with that. But yeah, Calgary, I will not forget my first stampede. We did too many stampedes in media, right? Like, so the way that it worked for us was, especially with Kick, I had to be on site on the grounds from an hour before my shift at 9 until the hour it finished at 3. I had to help line up the interviews for the drive guy. So think of, Kim Mitchell, not on his best behavior, having to show up, floods at the grounds with the van being like, you're stepping into the van and it's the only thing that's dry. A lot of black dress socks and North Star runners walking by you and you're trying not to make fun. And you're just thinking, but you know what? I remember I had never, ever, I'd been in places where they'd had occasions, festivals and things, but nothing like the Stampede. There's just nothing like it. Now, I won't go to, I will go to a concert and I will go to the grounds, but I still like the rodeo. And actually this year they're doing a particular Indigenous event, the 3-horse thing.
Oh, yeah, after the trucks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know one of the
like a relay
photographers.
race?
Yeah. But the guy has to literally, I heard him on an interview on something and I thought, he says, I've done skydiving. He said, but you never feel quite so free as the moment you leap from one horse to the next. Like, I have to see this, right? And it was interesting hearing him talk about the Indigenous experience even within Stampede. Because, my first experience, you see Indian Village. I don't even know what they call it now, First Nations something, which is terrible, and I apologize because I don't mean to be disrespectful. I've done too much narration now that serves various nations across BC and Alberta. The best one was to teach all the people who were working on the Kitimat project how to at least say the First Nations names correctly. That was a pronunciation guide experience. But seeing and hearing this guy talk about how there's such a long tradition of cooperation, but how they initially they didn't know if they wanted to let this in, but then once they saw it happen, they just,
it's amazing.
It's going to be amazing. I think people are going to love that as much as the Chucks.
Yeah.
So,
are you surprised by where you are? From hearing this story for the first time, super niche. Like you said, probably couldn't have pulled it off in Montreal, Vancouver. Here we are. Yeah. How does it sit with you?
I'm grateful first, and honestly, it is humbling when you see how many people who have more talent who gave up. And I don't like to say that in a way that people think that I make less of what my skill set, because it's not what I'm trying to do, and it's not false modesty. There are people who are genuinely so gifted, but they don't have, say, the business follow-up. And I've taught business classes for marketing and voice for years. And my favorite thing to tell them all is, okay, so you're artists and you're going to go into business. Good luck with that, right? I said, you're going to have to focus on something for longer than 5 seconds at a time. So that's your first challenge. And so, I'm very grateful. But I'm surprised. Partly because, like I said, there was no plan.
Yeah, that's it.
There's no plan. And I've been gifted with people and children and opportunities. And I keep thinking at some point I'm going to have to do something in return for karma, right? And I just think, wow, I'm building up quite a debt here. Don't get me wrong. One of the things that I have discovered, one of the reasons I loved eLearning narration was I discovered that I had the same thing that my parents had, which is I love to teach. My mom's favorite time at the library was children's story hour, right? Yeah. My dad, if he could teach somebody how to do something that would change their lives, I don't think there was anything more gratifying for him. And so I get that same kick. Like I remember thinking, like I just remember getting the same thing. Like I thought of a kid coming in from Newfoundland who's going to have all of his digits because he followed the safety training that we created for him. And so I always considered myself a partner to the people who wrote this stuff. And I always asked them, how can I serve you better? How can I serve the material better? Because they were so patient. They'd be like, yeah, okay, well, we'll do this. Or, yeah, we'll wait for 3 days because you're busy. Okay. And so Calgary, in a sense, I'm not surprised that it's in Calgary that it happened. But I'm surprised I'm still here because for a long while, I was kind of like the itinerant radio guy. Like I was quite happy to move. I think I've moved a total of 26 times.
Gross.
It is gross, and I never want to do it again, unless I'm moving to Spain. Then I'd consider it, right? So, but the idea, like intra-city moves, and then intercity moves, and interprovincial moves, and you end up in I still love seeing the lions on the bridge. Like I love that.
Yeah, that's cool.
And the people here and the mountains. I thought going to Montreal, I'd be happy because I'd be near water again. Yeah. But I couldn't believe how much I missed the mountains. There's something really special about high places. And Calgary offers me access. I cycle. I'm the co-captain of a cycle club that raises funds for the Ride to Conquer Cancer. And so you talk about a bunch of, extraordinary people that you're kind of tossed into. Yeah. So I've mentioned to you that I belong to a business breakfast club. They're really special, all of them, every single one of those guys. But one of them, Sean Bayless, works for RBC, also a member of Rotary Club. Sean said, hey, listen, would you like to join our team, RBC? I know you're not an employee, but we think you'd probably be a real motivating force on the team. And I thought, yeah, okay. So we get a free jersey. We don't have to pay for it. We get massages at the end of the ride because RBC's paying all right. So I joined, but he said, but you know what? We don't do team rides. I said, okay. We have to ride 200 kilometers in 2 days. How do we train up? He said, well, there's this group, One Aim, that does like these regular rides. And so I started training with these guys. And 2 years later, I thought, I'm doing all my training with these guys. I'd like to be part of their club. And so I co-captain the club now. And it's just an honor and a privilege because one of the founders of the club is now I'm going to get his title wrong, Vice President of Research at the National Cancer Research Institute in the U.S. Comes back for the ride every year. He had a rare form of cancer he defeated twice. Dennis Wong is one of the co-captains who lives here. He's one of the other co-founders, and his wife had cancer, and he's been a member ever since. Raises ridiculous amounts of money every year. Steve Murphy and his wife Colleen are my other co-captains. Steve is a guy who didn't do a lick of exercise until he was about 55. Had a wake-up call. I don't know if it was his dad's cancer or his own, but he became active. And he now in the last 3 years, he's run the Boston Marathon, the Berlin Marathon, and the Chicago Marathon. And he is, if I'm 64, he's 66, 67. And he's like, he goes to Mexico in the winter and runs and hikes and like, awesome. Yeah. And you're surrounded, like one of my good friends on the club lost her youngest daughter and has ridden across the country for the national Ride to Conquer Cancer 3 times. And there's just people like that, you're surrounded by people who like to bike, thank God. But during the pandemic, riding in the mountains reminded me of why I'd come back from Montreal because the road was closed to cars. And we were just out there riding free. It's like, there's a grizzly over there. We had to stop for a bit. Okay.
So cool.
Yeah. Got to see the boss last year. That was cool. So the boss is the big bear.
It's a big one.
Right. And we see a Parks Canada truck on the side. Say, are you here because there's a grizzly? And he just looks at me like I'm the biggest idiot on the planet. He says, points behind him over his shoulder. And I said, that's a big bear. He said, yeah, that's the boss. And he's like 100 meters off the road.
Jesus.
He said, you could stay here or keep riding. He's not interested in you, but I don't think I'd make the suggestion by staying here. One of my friends pulls out a granola bar. I'm like, no!
Wrong place.
Wrong place. Anyway, we kept cycling. But we've seen black bears, mountain goats, and mountain sheep. And it's, and all this time you're doing some good. The club is a community club, small club, and they've raised well over, I think it's well over $1 million. And I think I'm doing them wrong. I think it's 10 million, like a lot of
Big
money.
number.
I'm going to do it wrong. I think it's well over $1 million for sure, because it's been $100,000 every year, at least. And in their good years, more. Like last year, I think the club raised about 135, and it pales next to the corporate people.
Yeah.
And then you see these corporate guys who are CEOs and CFOs who still take part, and either they've had cancer or somebody they know has had cancer. The biggest individual fundraiser last year was one of those guys, and he raised $190,000.
Madness.
It's just, and it's one of those ridiculous big tent things to be a part of. It happens at the Strathmore Rodeo Grounds the last few years. And so, you know, you're surrounded by all kinds of rodeo people who are camping, and there's more spandex than you can shake a stick at. And they're like, who are you people? You're going to see a lot of us. And I mean, a lot of us.
So,
yeah,
that'd be a sight.
But, you know, again, that's another radio thing. Radio throws you into different, I guess, positions that you end up only being grateful for later. I was the MC for an Alberta Lung Association event in Kananaskis. And that was my first cycling event. And it was, you know, you ride 100 kilometers up the Highwood Pass from the Delta Hotel Village there and come back. And then the next day you ride out to pretty much the highway and then come back. And so, yeah, you stay fit as a kind of a consequence. And you stay fit for life. You're not doing it for any other reason but, you know, riding with friends. And but it's a remarkable group of people. And some of them are like very type A-ish driven. And you kind of go, okay, I can limit my time with you to the rides.
Yeah, you know.
Right? But, yeah, they're all equally committed. And it just kind of makes you realize, there are way bigger things in the world to worry about than when's your next lucky break going to get. But to finally answer your question about did I ever trust it, I started believing what would happen is the week would end and the next week would be a bit of a desert. And then Monday I would start getting phone calls and the week would populate. Yeah. And that happened so many times in a row that I remember saying to myself 2 or 3 years after I'd kind of been living this way, I thought, this has now happened 150 weeks. I think maybe we're good. Yeah. Some of the other lessons you learn in business is the longer you're in business, the more the people that you've done business with are going to retire. So nurture the relationships you've got with them, but also get to know who else they value in their companies. Yeah. Like from a business advice standpoint, I didn't know that.
That's interesting.
It shocked me when it first happened. And I realized I don't have a relationship with number 2. What am I going to do? Like that's one of the pillars. And so you learn very, very quickly. And the funny thing is when you develop relationships in person, and you've probably experienced this a ton, the virtual relationships, the purely virtual relationships aren't the same. And they don't have as much substance. It's like the fabric isn't quite as thick. And so, and especially when you're dealing with different generations now, they treat some of those relationships in a more cavalier fashion. They haven't learned humility. They haven't learned that that they should really probably nurture, even if you're not going to use the person again, keep the relationship. Find a way to make it go 2 ways. Yep. Like you can always learn and you can always teach. Like I've learned more from students reaffirming my own basics, than almost any other single mentoring experience. Yeah. So,
thanks for doing this.
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. This is exactly what happens, right?
But there's
get going.
No, it's like it's just cool to hear these stories. And it's when we first start this thing before we go on air, you're like, I don't know what's going to happen or what I'm going to say or what's going to be half interesting, but like you fast forward and it's an interesting story. It's just, and there's lots of, and I like digging in on these, certain little spots because you did it differently.
I did. And I've been very fortunate. And I've had people who've recognized it and people who've made me realize it and made me appreciate it and made me grateful for it because I think I would have walked through it with the same blind sense of no plan. I'll just keep moving forward. that I would have without people making me stop, pivot, acknowledge,
Yeah.
and go forward.
It's cool you know it. I end the show with one question. When I say Calgary, where's your head go?
The mountains. Partly because the city has gotten so big. When I first got here, so Christmas '84, the population of the city was under 600,000.
It was good back then.
And especially after my walking in Spain, like those walks through all those small towns, I remember walking into one village and the church bell was ringing. And I said to my son, Reed, I said, you know what? I said, I think I want to live in a place where I can hear a bell like that ring. And he said, really? So we walked through the village, and unbeknownst to us, it was just past Easter. Crusade bangers, like banners are hanging on these. I'm like, that's a little weird. And then we walk out of that little village on a 1,000-year-old Roman bridge and continued on our way. And I thought, I think as much as I love some of the things you can get in the city, all the culture, from Glenbow to theater to film and TV and just the people, right? And all their varied experiences. I think I want something a little bit smaller. I don't think I could live in Canmore or Banff, but man, I don't want to be far enough away that I can't see them. I love being on Nose Hill and knowing that I can just go there. Yeah. It's awesome. I still haven't been to Devil's Thumb. Do you know where Devil's Thumb is? You go up to the Lake Agnes Tea House at Lake Louise, and you keep walking around. And when you look at the mountains from Calgary, there's one little rounded stump between two peaks. That's the Devil's Thumb. And I've never been to it. It's still a hike that I've got to do. So as long as I'm in Calgary and I haven't done the Devil's Thumb, I'm here.
That's a good goal.
Good goal.
Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's just cool. It's cool to sit across and just listen to these stories. So thank you.